Stories from Real Life is an independent podcast that is written and produced by Melvin E. Edwards. You can get details about each episode or contribute to the future success of this show by visiting the website at www.podcastreallife.com.
On today's edition of Stories from Real Life with Melvin E. Edwards, our guest is algorithmist Noah Healy. Noah is a nuclear engineering graduate of the University of Virginia who has developed breakthrough technology as it relates to improving economic systems. His passion is combining mathematics with technology to produce game-changing solutions. Meanwhile, it is not lost on him that he has an enormous responsibility to produce algorithmic technology products that drive results, but also protect ethics and morality. That's why Noah considers himself an algorithmist with a conscience. Let's join today's guest, Noah Healy, and your host, Melvin E. Edwards.
You are listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello and welcome to another episode of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. Thanks for joining me on today's storytelling journey. As you heard today, our guest is algorithmist Noah Healy. So hello, Noah. Thank you for joining me on today's storytelling journey.
Hi, Melvin. I'm looking forward to this.
First, I want to know, your last name is Healy, if you have any relation to the late musician Jeff Healy, or Major Healy from I Dream of Jeannie.
Well, my grandfather got into genealogy a little bit, and according to him, the Healys of both spellings are all related to each other somehow. But it's a pretty long stretch, and I've got a few professional musicians in the family, and I don't think anybody put together a map of us over to Jeff, and certainly not to Major.
You should check on that. That could be your claim to fame.
Could be. I'm still trying to work on my own claim to fame.
So you're a graduate of the University of Virginia. So why did that school shut down its nuclear engineering program after you were enrolled? Did you blow something up?
I did not blow anything up, although I did get to pull the control rods out of the reactor once. They were actually shutting the program down before I entered into it. So I got in through kind of the back side door on some exemptions. So basically the coursework wasn't particularly popular, and so they weren't getting very many students. And the Board of Visitors wasn't particularly pro-nuclear in the first place, and so they wanted the system shut down. And they run the university, so they got their way. And it was only really still remaining open because of one PhD student that was completing his thesis. And while I was studying in my undergrad, I was taking classes from one of the professors who was just a really good teacher. And he introduced me to the guy who became my undergraduate thesis advisor. And I wind up doing some basically, journal studies related to ways to do things with what this guy's actual project was. It's all about computer simulation. It turns out that there's a well-known technique that you can fiddle the inputs and then read the results of the outputs of a computer simulation and get a mathematical equation that will describe what that computer simulation is doing. And so I did the journal research on that, and my thesis advisor really liked it and said that I should go, do a year grad school, because he had money lying around, a grant or a fellowship actually, and just said, if you want to go to grad school and you can get in, I'll pay for it. So
Nice.
I went, took the GRE, did a lot better than my grades were, and then took that to the graduate dean and said, hey, you guys want a free year of tuition, or do you not want a free year of tuition? And they said, okay, you can come in as long as it's understood that it's one and done. It doesn't matter whether you graduate. Like we're not holding the door open for you. We're just letting you hang out here. And so I was like, yeah, that's fine with me.
Wow, that's quite an adventure. And now you're an algorithm developer. So I don't even have a clue what that is. Can you explain that to me?
Sure. Well, computers, it turns out, are both a lot more esoteric and a lot more prosaic than people usually think about them. On the esoteric side, the mathematics that gives us computers actually mathematicized human imagination, and technically other forms of imagination as well if we have any access to those things. On the prosaic side, um, it turns out that the information in these algorithms is the same kind of thing in our universe that uh, entropy is. So, just like you could design a piston so that explosive gasoline can drive your car, you can design a sequence of logical computational operations such that a torrent of information can do something useful for you. And that's the task of algorithm design. The cool thing is that a lot of really smart people have actually developed an enormous number of existing algorithms. So a big piece of it is, again, just a lot of book research where you have to go look up all the ideas that other smart people have had. But once you have enough of those tools in your box, you can start putting them back together in completely new ways and developing new kinds of ideas. And my interest and specialty is dynamically stable uh, social scale algorithms, which is kind of important because the the institutions we currently associate with the word algorithm, like Google and Twitter, whatever, X, Meta, Facebook, they all use algorithms that are unstable. And that's one of the reasons those platforms are so bad.
Okay. So how is what you do different from artificial intelligence or machine learning? Or are they all part of the same
There's
system?
a lot of overlap in relationship. Uh, the primary forms of artificial intelligence that people are being introduced to, unfortunately, are also using unstable algorithms, which is why they're very cagey about them and keep them quite secret, because that's sort of the only way they can keep from having them just fall apart instantly. Uh, there is, however, a group of AI systems that are based around stable algorithms that are significantly more impressive, although not as kind of generally useful. The best known of these is probably the modern chess and Go and poker engines that are based on these AI principles, and they work effectively by playing the game against themselves. What they do, it's rather clever. They take a version of the game and they put it into a harness where it works a little harder than it normally does, and then they train a new version of the game to imitate the way that slightly harder working version does, but without the hard work. And then they can take that version and put that back in the harness, and by iterating through thousands and thousands of iterations of making a game engine act like a slightly stronger game engine, you eventually get these super strong, human untouchable game engines. And so that's one of the first, what I would say, known stable uh, uh, information algorithms out there.
Okay, so you've had quite an ordeal in dealing with the U.S. government with your patent.
I
So
have.
can you explain the process of applying for a patent and what you've gone through and where you are right now in the process?
Sure. So the process of applying for a patent, you can do it without an attorney. I wanted to have one, so my first year was looking for one. You could just apply for a patent, really even without an idea if you wanted to. There's something called a provisional patent application that will run out in a year, but it doesn't have to have very many details on it. And so uh, places like research universities or other types of R&D houses who think they might be onto something will file provisional patents on, you know, semiconductors that have carbon in them or something. And if nothing happens, then nothing happens, and you didn't really give anything away. And if something happens, then you've already got your spot in the door and you can go ahead of everybody else. But the big thing is your sort of full patent application. And in that, you have to write down a description of what it is that you're talking about that needs to be clear enough that uh, somebody skilled in the art could understand how to replicate it. And then you have to put in a number of claims about sort of the space around that thing. So you could patent a spoon if you wanted to, and you'd get the patent if you specified the claims about the spoon so specifically that no existing spoon technology would be impacted. And so basically, if you whittled your own personal spoon out of, a hunk of wood from your backyard, and then wrote the claims so specifically that they only applied to that one specific physical object, the patent office would be like, yeah, you want to waste your money, we don't care. That's kind of fine. But if you want it to be useful, you need other similar kinds of ideas. So if you're the first person that came up with like a car engine, then you don't want somebody to be able to replace one of the bolts with a screw and suddenly be outside your patent. So that's where there's a certain amount of negotiation and back and forth. But if you get to that far, your examiner will give you a notice of acceptance, and then it's like the DMV. The first person you deal with gives you the forms, and then you take the forms to the person that actually gives you the thing. That's how it works. You take your acceptance, you pay the fee, and they give you a patent, unless you're me.
So has your situation been different?
It remains to be seen why. They have not been terribly forthcoming why they chose to break the law 4 years ago, but they did. So the patent office has to abide by, and patent, everyone else has to abide by the manual of patent examination procedure, which is it's all online. Um, I'm not entirely sure how long it is because I haven't sat down and read the whole thing, but it's all HTML pages, and I've seen section counts in the thousands. So it
Wow.
may well be tens of thousands of pages long. Um, when I had to serve the patent office for my lawsuit, um, in addition to filing the lawsuit in federal court, you also have to tell them that you're doing that. And the procedure is so specific that it not only tells you what addresses at the patent office you have to send the two letters you have to write in, it tells you what the font and typeface
Wow.
size that those letters have to be written in. Um, uh, I believe it's 14 point Times New Roman, which is not the default on any word processing system I've ever seen. So, yeah, it's incredibly detailed, and there's one particular section that details what it is that has to happen after you get a notice of acceptance, and the only way for the patent office to not issue a patent is for an assistant director to sign a uh, notice of withdrawal. And for the first notice of acceptance, they didn't do that, and that's that's against the law.
All right. So you've called yourself an algorithmist with a conscience. What do you mean by that?
Well, there's a joke in computer science that um, no ethical computer programmer would ever write, this joke goes way back, so it's a little dated, would ever write a procedure titled Nuke Baghdad, because every ethical programmer knows that you shouldn't put data into code, and so you'd actually make it nuke target and make Baghdad a parameter, so you could put any parameter you wanted to nuke. But my training at UVA is really big on ethics training, and they pounded it into us in in engineering school. And so once I got a job programming computers, which I wasn't really qualified to have, the first part of the ethics training kicked in of, if you're going to be a professional, you need to actually have mastered a body of knowledge so that you know what you're talking about. And so I spent quite a few years learning very deeply, and then it sort of became my primary hobby. And so I've spent now about a quarter of a century continually learning about these subjects. Then the second part of the ethics kicks in once you sort of understand what you're doing, is that you're not allowed to give your client bad advice. You're not allowed to kill an inordinate number of people, that kind of thing. And once you start looking at the systems of the world with this computational lens, it starts becoming very clear that our society has not actually adapted to be able to function with computers. Uh, the, the kinds of issues that come about from things like freedom of speech didn't anticipate a universe where most of the speech that's being produced would be made by machines. And so things like noise become a much bigger issue than they ever could have been in medieval villages, or post-revolutionary cities, or even the metropolises of the 1950s. We're in a whole new world now, and so I was I was trying to work out some of these stable algorithms, because I think that that's absolutely critical for us to be able to exploit computer technology in ways that aren't ultimately very, very harmful. And I found a general approach. It's not the only such approach, but a general approach, and applied it to financial markets. And this thing popped out, and it's a few 100,000 times more efficient than the financial markets we actually have. And the patent office has admitted that nobody's ever thought of it before. And so that's my mission in life these days.
All right. So you're a market designer and a game theorist as they relate to improving economic systems. So your contents aside, what do you say to people who may think that your system is a way to game the financial and commodities market?
Well, so the game theory actually allows us to make it so that it's a way to ungame the financial and commodities markets. The existing markets, sort of on the surface, are about people that need to buy and people that need to sell coming together in a common place. But that hasn't really been true since their inception. The the amount of stuff that actually gets produced and the amount of stuff that actually gets consumed is relatively small compared to the amount of stuff that gets traded through the marketplace. And that's because the people making the stuff and the people using the stuff need to know the price before they go ahead. If you don't already know what aluminum and electricity cost, building a factory making aluminum widgets is going to be kind of a stupid thing for you to do. Uh, and if you don't already know what alfalfa or corn is going to fetch, growing it is kind of a big gamble. So what you want to know is where prices are going to be. And for that to happen, there needs to be this kind of big, stable, steady stream of trades that are happening all the time that people can kind of see happening. So you see how Bob is getting prices and what Joan is getting and everybody else. So what the markets have been doing since the Renaissance is people with money trade with each other, and they are effectively bound to stick close to where prices ought to be, because if they get too far out over the cliff, either farmers will show up with a whole bunch of stuff to sell them for a lot more than they ought to pay for it, or the buyers will show up with a whole bunch of money to pick up all their inventory for a lot less than they ought to sell it for. And so everybody's sort of keeping each other honest. But we left that world several decades ago, and we've got computers running this thing for us now. And the number of trades compared to, well, start off with just the number of offers. Uh, there are thousands of terabytes of offers that are made, virtually none of which get picked up on. So that's all just noise. It's like, hey, I'll buy that from you for $50. No, I'll buy it from you for $48. Well, like the price is $30, but it's just distractions. Maybe you'll be dumb enough to take this really bad offer that the computer is offering for a few milliseconds and then takes back off the board once something else happens. So but then some of those things actually do get traded, and the ratio there, again, it's 40, 50, it's raising. In gold markets it's like 80 to 1. So we're in this world where most of what you see is fake, and it didn't used to be. Uh, and that fakeness, if you look at a graph of the fraction of the American economy that is the financial system, and the correlation between per capita productivity in America and median income, you will notice that both of them have an inflection point in the early 70s that happen at the same time. So basically, from pretty much the Civil War until the Nixon administration, um, when the country got richer, the people in the country got richer. And then we started plugging computers into our financial system. And when the country got richer, the financial system got richer. And that's the way it's been for about 50 years now.
Wow. So that leads into my next question, and that may be partially the answer for the next question. So, how are marketplaces natural monopolies?
Well, they're natural monopolies because the service they offer is dependent upon sort of everything being there. So if you think about Amazon compared to other retail online, if you go back to, say, 1995, there's actually a number of stores that are online. Amazon comes out, and the bookstores that are online aren't really doing that well anymore. But there's still a lot of different retail lots online. But gradually, Amazon's taken up a larger and larger share. Why? Well, because if you're buying things online and Amazon is offering everything and they have this best price guarantee, then what's the sense of going anywhere else? You see the same kind of thing happening in the other space as well, where Walmart is taking up bigger and bigger shares. Well, all that stuff goes on steroids in the financial markets because there's no brick and mortar, there's no locality. If you can buy stocks in the New York Stock Exchange, why would you buy stocks anywhere else? They're the number one. They're the liquid exchange. If you sold me some of your stocks just privately without going through them, maybe I'm taking advantage of you. I mean, maybe you think you're taking advantage of me and I'm the stupid one in this trade. But one of us should be convinced that we're the stupid one, and we should want to go over that guy should want to go over to the New York Stock Exchange and leave the other guy left saying, well, I wanted to take advantage of somebody, but I guess I can't. I have to go. So um, these networks, in much the same way that a language that's being used will come to dominate. So, you know, we all speak English. why don't why don't we fall apart? Why didn't Americans have the same kind of thing happen to them as happened in medieval France and medieval Germany, where the language fractures? Well, because we had mass communication. Everybody's talking to everybody, and you, in that case, you converge towards a similar language to the other people because you want to. So television happens, and regional accents, they're not gone, but they're very suppressed from where they used to be. Uh, same kind of combination of social and economic forces in markets. The dollar is the world's reserve currency because the most important markets on the planet are in America, and we use dollars here, and so that becomes a self-reinforcing prophecy.
All right. So you discovered a method of price transaction cost. So did you realize, or do you realize now, that if you could control the price of eggs and milk, that you could be the incumbent president? You could be the incoming president right now.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the things I always thought is that it really shouldn't be. Certainly shouldn't be as heavy a lift as it's turned out to be, because the advantages that accrue to the people that make this happen are so insane that it's sort of dumb of people not to be the people attempting to make it happen. One of the things in America is that, yeah, presidents get returned when the country's doing okay financially. And what okay financially means has actually degraded over the last 4 or 5 decades. Back in the 50s and 60s, okay financially meant, uh, you know, 4 or 5% growth. If you get 4 or 5% growth these days, they're gonna start knocking down churches to put up new temples to you. Like these days, we think 3% growth is a miracle. Um, but this system would be able to cut something like 2 to 3% of the cost of operating our economy out of our economy, and that goes straight to the bottom line. So it would be around a 2.5% increase in the rate of growth, and not a 2 to 2.05%, 2 to 4.5%. Um, and yeah, something like that would effectively create guaranteed incumbency for whoever happened to be in power when it happened. Same kind of deal. The current markets as designed have all of that cost, but that cost is incredibly distributed. The people that operate, say, the CME group, they're earning a few $1 billion a year, but that's a few $1 billion out of a pool of around $1 trillion a year. They're getting like less than 0.5% of the total. With this, they could cut the cost of the entire system in half and take half of that cost for their own revenues. They could make 60 times as much money as they make right now. Well, they could have 60 times as much revenue. It's cheaper to run this than it is to run their current system, so their profits just go off the charts. Yeah, and that's just what the math says. I was actually fairly early on. I was talking to a billionaire, and he said, "Never talk like that. Like, I don't believe you just because these numbers are too insane." But that's what the numbers are.
Wow. So if President Trump follows through on his campaign promise to institute tariffs across the board on certain countries on imports, how will tariffs impact your algorithm?
Well, my algorithm is about price discovery, and so it's about amalgamating knowledge. And so tariffs are basically irrelevant because people in general would still have all the knowledge that's engaged. So the markets will be able to figure out what the proper pricing is. My market, if we ever go back to the old style markets, if we, go through all the financial institutions and rip their computers out of the walls and make them do things with like Pony Express or something, then they would be able to figure it out. But the the big shift, in all likelihood, with my system would come down to the relationships between various countries' trading systems. Right now, Chicago, there's a couple in New York, and then London have the most important markets on the planet. And because of that natural monopoly character, nobody else can really do anything about that. My system can outcompete these marketplaces. And so it would be possible for other countries to adopt this technology ahead of us and sort of get a first mover advantage, take over that position, at which point we would pretty much out of defense have to also adopt the system, uh, and we could actually see bifurcated trading for pretty much the first time since the establishment of the British Empire.
All right, so tell me about the company you founded and how it could benefit the average person, if there is an average person in this type of a market.
Yeah, yeah. I like to think of it as the random person. I think that's the closest word I've been able to come up with. So Core Disk is a company that essentially exists to license the IP for these coordinated discovery markets, which has some problems because I'm suing the patent office for being criminals and making up a lot of nonsense to try to justify their criminality. But I've got some implementations of the system and a bunch of documentation about sort of how it can work out, and you can license this technology and go build marketplaces that comply with whatever local regulations that exist in wherever it is you are. Uh, get your customers together, get them using this thing, and start taking advantage. In terms of what that does for the random person in that group, there's basically three roles within my market, and all of them have a benefit from attaining that role. The producer, that's a seller that also actually makes this stuff. They don't just have it lying around necessarily. Uh, they're going to see that lower cost marketplace is going to go straight to their bottom line. So their margins get increased, and commodity production is a low margin business. So they will probably see something like 60+% margin improvement by participating in a functioning coordinated discovery market, and that's obviously a complete business changer for virtually everybody. Uh, the consumer, that's the sort of ultimate buyer. They won't see an immediate change moving to CDM, except that they don't have to pay nearly as much attention to the marketplace anymore because it's moving at a speed that's closer to what they need. But um, they will find that the producers that they used to work with are rapidly switching over. So they're going to have to follow along. And also, they're going to see that new producers are going to be produced to try to chase after that higher margin. And as that happens, they are going to see their costs come down. Uh, and then the forecaster speculator, that's sort of where the current middleman role naturally rests. They get a world where they don't need nearly as much capital as they used to have because the ROI on their investments goes up enormously. Uh, and they actually have a positive sum market. right now, every time you put an order in the market, you got to pay money for it. And the way the algorithms work, you want to put dozens of sort of non-functioning orders into the marketplace just to try to hide what you're doing. So they're paying a lot of overhead for, deception essentially. And my system pays them for not deceiving people by getting them, working with their their end users instead of against them. And so they get they get a positive sum marketplace. They get all the money that they put in comes back to somebody. If they're right, it's coming back to them. But if they're wrong, it's going to pay the people that had to correct for them.
Okay. So for people who want to contact you about your service, how can they do so?
Well, I'm pretty open. I've got an email address, noahphealy@yahoo.com, and you can also connect to me on LinkedIn. I'm Noah Healy there. You can find out more about it. I've got a website, Core Disk. There's also some videos on uh, my YouTube page, and actually, I've checked. You can pretty much just ask generative AIs about coordinated discovery markets, and they'll give you some information about what I'm up to. Last time I checked Google, it even mentioned me by name, and I was on a anonymous server, so it didn't know who I was when it was doing this.
Well, Google knows where you live, probably.
Well, there's that. Yeah. Yeah, they might be tracking me, but yeah, I went to the library to see if I could get an unbiased opinion out of what's their thing called? I can't remember off the top of my head, but yeah, I tried that out, and yeah, it mentioned me by name, which was the first time that had happened.
Wow, that's interesting. All right, so before we go, you sort of teased a story you had in the message you sent to me. I don't know if you've already shared that, but if you haven't, you feel free to go ahead and do that now.
Well, I kind of teased a little bit here too. Yeah, the patent office is going off the deep end, and so I am suing them in federal court. And it's been quite an adventure. So I if you take the patent office to federal court, the primary place to go is the appellate court for the federal circuit, which is one of only two national courts in the country whose precedents apply to the entire country. The other one is the Supreme Court, and that's the only step away from these guys there is. Uh, so you get 63 days to file, and then they get 30 days to respond, but they asked for an extension, so they've got an extra month, and then I'll have 2 weeks to come back if they come up with anything. And they've actually already admitted default. So the they attached 600 pages to the case of the entire prosecution history, all the communications between me and the patent office, and that communication does not contain that notice of withdrawal, signed or unsigned, that I mentioned. The law says that they have to have there. So uh, basically, my case is that they broke the law 4 years ago. Since then, they've made two claims, both of which are disprovable. One mathematically, and the other one again from the direct record. And then the the patent judges made a further claim, which is also directly disprovable mathematically. So my case consists of two mathematical proofs and two references to their own records, and we'll see how judges feel about that after they try whatever it is they try next.
Okay, so is there a chance this case could go to the Supreme Court? And the second part of the question, if it does, promise me you're going to call it the Major Healy Act if it goes into effect.
Well, the case has already been named. It's called In Re Healy. But I could try to get a major in there somehow. Um, but it could go to the Supreme Court. Like I don't know why the patent office is making the decisions that it's making. None of the things that they say make any sense. In order
Hmm.
to sort of cover themselves, the patent judges specifically declared what parts of the record they were going to look at, and they left out all the parts of the record where I had submitted evidence that what I was saying was true. And they didn't have to leave out the parts of the record where the patent office had submitted evidence that what they said was true, because they've never done that. Uh, you know, nothing they've said in 4 years has been defensible. So if this judge sort of continues the existing pattern of just saying no, but we're not going to give any reasons, then the only point of appeal for me would be the Supreme Court. I did lay out to these judges that because my case is tautological in nature, the only way really to deny me a patent is to categorically deny patents in some way. And that's going to affect a lot of other patents as well. And so if they do that, that's fine. Like if they turn off the patent system, I can't have one. Not much I can do or say about that. But if they say, you know, you're right, there's no way to argue against any of this because there isn't, but we're still not going to give you a patent, but everything else is okay, then that's a straightforward, rights violation under, Fifth Amendment protections, basically. And that would, I'd at least try to get it on the Supreme Court docket. I don't know. I don't know if they'd pay any attention to me or not.
Worth a try. So our guest today has been Noah Healy. Noah, thanks so much for joining me today. This has been a great learning experience.
Thanks for having me.
So that's it for this week's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another great storytelling journey. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
That was Stories from Real Life. Join us again next week for another great storytelling journey. See you next time.